Hey, Deliberate Leaders. I am your host, Allison Dunn, executive coach and founder of the Deliberate Leaders podcast, dedicated to helping leaders build strong, thriving businesses. Each episode, we feature inspiring interviews to help you on your leadership journey. And I am super excited about our guest today. He is Ron Carucci. He is the co-founder and managing partner at Navalent. He is a popular contributor at Harvard Business Review and Forbes, and a two-time TEDx speaker, as well as a best-selling author of 8 books, including groundbreaking Amazon #1 book, Rising to Power. This book is, I think, a product of a 10-year study on executive transition to find out why more than 50% of leaders fail within their first 18 months of appointment. And he uncovers 4 differentiating capabilities that sets successful leaders apart, which he is going to be sharing with us today. Ron, thank you so much for joining us here on Deliberate Leaders.
Allison, it's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
I always like to kick these off with kind of asking for your #1 tip on leadership for our Deliberate Leader listeners.
My gosh, where do you start? If you do not have people coming into your office on a regular basis, telling you things that are uncomfortable to hear, you can be very confident that your leadership sucks.
That's such a great tip, actually. Let's dive into that. So I know that it is really important to have people being able to tell you difficult things. And the most common thing as an executive coach that I recognize leaders don't get is that feedback, right? That feedback, the challenge to push, there's sort of every, you don't want a yes team around you. You really do want some pressure, if someone has just heard that tip and they're now questioning whether or not their leadership might suck, what should they do about it?
Well, go find out, right? So if you don't have access to good data, whether it's anonymous or direct, you need to be calibrated. Too many leaders go uncalibrated for too long, and I don't just mean a cheesy 360. I mean really forensic data on how people experience your leadership, how they experience your team, and how they experience your remit to the organization, right? So your team and you and your department or whatever you're leading doesn't exist apart from a context. There's a remit to the organization. And that strategic context is part of who you are as a leader. You may not understand what part you play in it. Many leaders believe that their intentions are what's actually happening in the real world, and don't realize that the movie playing in their head is not the movie playing out in front of them. And of course, if nobody tells you that, I think watch for cues. If people in the middle of a heated debate are silent, if you're watching little facial cues of people, like, little hints that they're uncomfortable, don't assume silence is consent. Dig deep and create an environment where you get to hear the things. Listen, you can be very confident that you are the topic of conversation at dinner at night in people's homes on your team. You just have to find out what stories they're telling.
Right. Okay. I think just go find out and get the data. That's awesome. The statistic that 50% of leaders fail within the first 18 months is, it's incredibly expensive, right? To have that type of turn and lack of longevity in 50% of roles. So first and foremost, but in your research, you found that there were a couple of key elements. And so I'm hoping that we can cover those in our short interview together today. So what were some of the key elements that you've uncovered that caused that? And then capabilities of successful ones is going to be kind of the latter part.
So the book was the study was launched by a failure. We were working with a CEO and his team after a large transformational project. And one of the leaders on that team, or on the design team, had set themselves apart. They were beloved middle manager, everybody's high potential list, pick of the year. And so when he was given a bigger job at the end of the project, nobody was surprised. 9 months later, he was in my caller ID. I was super excited to hear from him, assumed he was calling to check in, say hi, tell me about all the great things he'd done. And he was calling to tell me he'd been fired. And I could barely speak. 2 hours later, the CEO called to let me know that they let him go. And more than subtly inferring that some of the failure was my responsibility for not having it better prepared him, which, as an executive coach, is not the call you ever want to get. And so I said, can I just come back in and sniff around, on my own time? I have to understand how we could have so wildly misjudged his potential when he was so gifted. How do you go from being that gifted to that much of a disaster in 10 months? It just does make no sense to me. Well, that little investigation is what led to our 10-year study with more than 2,700 leaders to understand why we've known for 20 years that it's about 50 to 60% don't make it within 18 months. Why is that okay? I mean, obviously the recruiters love it because it's an annuity, right? But besides that, why are we rolling dice on people's careers, people's families, and not wanting to know why this is happening? So I wanted to understand. I wanted to turn over every rock, understand what are the landmines people are landing in here, and there were dozens, and so we documented all of them in the book. But then I wanted to understand if there was a way. Well, what are the other half doing? If half of them are sticking the landing and thriving at this really strange higher altitude that is so foreign to people in the middle, what are they doing? What's the secret? So we were actually able to, we used IBM Watson. So we had some great AI statistical modeling data to look at the data to say, can we cut this up in some way that sets the good ones apart? The interesting thing about failure, the seeds are sown so early, Allison, like even in the interview process. We say to executives we're recruiting or we're looking to promote, wow, look at these great apps you built and that's what we need here. Or my gosh, you turned a supply chain around there. That's what we need here. Or, oh my gosh, I can't believe these brands you built. We need that kind of brand building here. And when we say those things to people in the interest of affirming them, making them feel good about their resume, going through their, we know that the resume and the interview are still the least reliable devices to select people, but we're still using them. What we're saying to people in those sentences is, you have a formula and we want you to come here and apply it. And so people think they have this mythical mandate now to come here and repeat their past successes. So when they arrive, they do what you told them to do. They reach back for their past successes and they try and slap it on the organization mindlessly, without contextualizing them, without asking them what might not apply here, without ever asking what it is that I need to change here. And we've all seen the movie. They start pushing harder, people start to resist, they start kicking up dust, people start to back up further, and then suddenly they weren't a good fit. And out they go. So that's just one example of many we found of how the seeds of failure of otherwise well-intended people who want to come make a difference, who probably were talented, rarely is the issue, really they weren't a good fit. And shame on you if you hired somebody that wasn't a good fit. That just becomes the great catch-all bucket to use when you didn't do a good job helping them on board and assimilate well to succeed.
Right. I appreciate that you point out that we do plant those seeds in the interview, right? And as humans, we want to be successful. And so we apply what has made us successful in the past. So taking those two metrics to it, I also really, truly believe 100%, even if you're hiring at a very high level in an organization, they still require onboarding. Especially at a higher level. Yes. And knowing that they're coming from a different organization, it's just ever so more critical. And the one thing that honestly, most organizations are just absolutely horrific at that onboarding process. It may be a day or two.
They think our employee orientation is onboarding. We actually have a whole methodology for onboarding, and it's 1 year. We know that the 6-month mark is actually the most fragile. And you have to socially onboard them, technically onboard them, and organizationally onboard them. And most companies do a little bit about organizational onboarding with your benefits and here's the bathroom key. And they do a little bit of social onboarding as we'll book up a couple of lunches for you in the first month. And that's so inadequate, especially for senior leaders. They've got to build their network. They have to know who their stakeholders are. They've got to get technically, just because they have great technical experience doesn't mean they technically understand the job here. Right. So yeah, it's a woefully inadequate process. But for many people for whom the altitude is new, then they have to contend with the fact that their life's now on the jumbotron.
Right.
And suddenly everything they're doing is on public display, being commented on. And when you overlay that with social media or internal social media channels like Yammer, now these leaders are now always on the defense. They're always back on their heels. They don't know how to handle the fact that people have concocted 20 versions of them. And they always have a bullhorn strapped to their mouth 24/7. Everything they say and do is amplified. There's no such thing as small talk. You can't even walk down the hall quickly without people having to attach meaning to, oh my God, something's wrong. And you just go into the bathroom. So learning to deal with the fact that you're now a bigger than life persona of yourself. And this whole, every executive, I'm sure you've heard this from many of your clients, I just want to be myself. Well, that's a great idea. The problem is there's 20 versions of you. So which version of yourself do you want to be? And the version of you that you're playing that hides half of you is the most dangerous one. Because the parts that are missing, people are going to fill in with parts of you that don't exist.
So I would love for anyone who's listening right now, and you may be the person who's hired that executive, that, you know, you're giving them a 50-50 roll of the dice of whether they succeed or fail. That what Ron just shared is a 1-year onboarding acclimation where you're actively helping them get to that new elevation inside of your company. So let's say I'm in the company, or you know, this client is inside of the company and they've now been in there for 12 months and no one's coming to their door, and they don't have that feedback, and they may be on this 50%. What type of, like, where does the turnaround happen? And at what point is it too far past that?
Well, I think you if you've lost traction with your boss, or then that's a red alarm. And if you've lost traction with your peers, that's especially a red alarm. So, building the critical connection. So if I were to ask you, tell me who are the stakeholders in your organization who are critical to the success of your remit, and tell me whose success you are critical to their remit. And if you can't immediately give me 5 names for each of those lists, I'm going to be worried, and you should be worried too. Yeah. Most people play up to their boss and they pander to their direct reports, and that's it. And those are the boss is important, but not to pander to. The boss is important because you have to drive their agenda. Direct reports can undermine you and cause you to fail if you lose them. So you can't lose your team. But the higher up in an organization you are, the more spidery your network becomes, and the more interdependent your contributions are. And so you've got to know who are the people if you're in marketing, who in sales, who in supply chain. If you're in R&D, who in manufacturing. There are critical people who are typically on the adjacent nemesis rivalry function that you have to plant yourself a flag with and build a partnership with. Who are they? And if you haven't done that, start yesterday.
Okay, excellent advice.
So let's go to the part 2 of your question. So what were the exemplars doing? What did the successful ones do that set them apart? There were 4. And the asterisk here is it's all 4. So I had our team do 99 different regression analysis on this data because I wanted to understand. And no matter how we cut that data, these 4 were in the top, meaning that if you only had 3, you were in the failure group. I didn't want to have to say it's 4-0 because I think Jesus is already employed and there was nobody else. But the data, my researchers finally said, enough, Ron, it's not going to change. It's these 4-0. The great news is you can learn them. They're not like some magical genetic material that just appear in some people. The bad news is you shouldn't start learning them when you first become a vice president. First one is context, that you can read the tea leaves, that you can adapt, that you can look around you and ask yourself, why is this happening? You have a natural curiosity around why things are the way they are. In your industry, with your competitor set, and in your culture of your organization. You have an anthropological nature to not just be the answer ATM and slap on your answers, but to go, that's interesting. I wonder why that's this way. And in so doing, you learn to adapt. Because if you're going to get past an obstacle or get through an opportunity that you read the context and discover, you actually recognize that I have to change first. So you're contextually intelligent. Second one is breadth, right? So the higher up you go, the more fragmented the organization feels. right? The silos splinter, the work divides, mitosis happens among functions. Your job is to create cohesion. Your job is to bring the pieces together into a whole. So at a higher level, you're not interested in research and development, marketing analytics, or product development. You're interested in innovation, right? Which is at the intersection of those functions. You're not interested in supply chain, finance. You're interested in driving out costs, right? So your remits are much more capability driven than they are functionally driven, which means you may sit in a function, but you no longer have the luxury of your silo. If you grew up in finance, you cannot see the world economically anymore. If you grew up in marketing, you can't see the world through economic consumers anymore. If you grew up in sales, you can't see the world through revenue anymore. You have to let go of those functional biases and see the world through capabilities and stitch the seams. So breadth means you could stitch the seams, you could bring the pieces together and make them a whole. Third was choice. So leaders at senior levels obviously get to make much harder calls and don't like to. And so often leaders will put those hard decisions down and bypass them by winning favor with people, buying popularity, doling out way too many yeses to make people like them, and diluting the focus of the organization and diluting the resources. Leaders, sorry about that. Leaders need to be able to make the hard calls. They need to be able to say no. And accept the fact that leadership is the ability to disappoint people at a rate they can absorb. And so if you can't narrow the focus of your organization and give them the gift of priorities and stick to those, just know that you may win some near-term popularity, but you will lose long-term respect. And the last was connection. These are the people, every company has them. They have relationships with their bosses, with their peers, and with their direct reports that are magical. These are the bosses everybody wants to be around. You want to be in their presence. They're likable, they're credible, they're trustworthy, they're smart. You know that if you're around them, you're going to learn. You know that if you're around them, you're going to get better. And the interesting thing about these exemplar leaders is that when they prioritize their stakeholders and their relationships, they prioritize them by who they could help succeed, not by who they could get something from. So you knew that their interest was in you and you could trust it. So breadth, context, choice, connection. Master all four of those and you will not be one of those 50%ers that fails.
So I know that you said all four are critical. Are they in that order, or it's just you have to have all of those skills?
You have to have all of them. I think if you have outages in some of them, work on those. Connection and context were the faster fails. So in that 18-month span, you could fail quicker if you had broken relationships or you misread the context. The guy that I got that phone call from was a context failure. Choice and breadth are slower fails because it depends on if your organization is highly siloed and fragmented, you might not stick out so badly, right? If you already have poor governance systems and decision-making and decision rights are not clear anyway, your choice-making apparatus may not stick out so badly. So those are longer fails. But in the book, we have an assessment tool that can help you figure out where am I strong in these areas and where do I need to shore up.
Fantastic. In your research, did you identify that it's often that the executive is self-aware enough to recognize that this is happening, or is it by shock, like the person who called you and said, "Oh my gosh, I've just been let go"? Did he know it was coming?
It's always in hindsight, I can see the signs.
Okay.
Right. And so, but they weren't contextually intelligent enough to read the tea leaves. So, you will know early on by how forthcoming are people, your ratio of questions to declarative sentences in any given meeting should give you a good clue. And if early on, if you are not asking 3 times more questions than you are declaring things, bad idea. Listen to the meeting. Is it simultaneous monologues around your table, or are people asking questions of each other? Are people coming to you and saying, "Hey boss, can I talk to you about Bill?" Collusion, right? And you're going to want to be the hero and go take care of Bill. You took the bait. You're just further in the fragmentation and further in the collusion, right? So there are cues that would tell you: are you being played? Are your peers trusting you? Are your peers coming to you and saying, So what are you doing? Are they suspicious of your agendas? How much dust are you kicking up and how early? Do not march in with teams of consultants and turn everything on its head, in your first 3 months. So early on in your tenure in the role, you'll get signals from people. Mostly that people are going to be afraid of you. And so they're going to want to compensate for their fear by sucking up to you, by embellishing their contributions, by telling you why they're so worthy to stay on your team, especially if they think you're sizing up your team and going to make some changes. You need to be very transparent about how you plan to make changes, when you make the plan, how you're going to inform them. Don't make people decode you. Decode you for them. Tell them what you see is what you get. This is how you read my face. This is how you can know I'm upset. This is why not to talk to me. This is how to ask me a question. This is how to bring me a problem. Just give them all the code now, so they're not going to try and figure you out and do it wrong.
Excellent insights. Do you have any specific tips? Because I do agree that the context and connection I can see as being like a quick failure if it's not working. Context, I think, being able to read the tea leaves, I think is a skill that you pick up. And I would say in general, I find that people who lead into leadership typically can make a context, but not connection. Do you have any tips on connection? Because if you have all the context, but no connection to it, it doesn't work.
Well, vice versa. You can have great connections and be dumb.
True.
Right? So it's a great point, Allison. These are very interdependent variables. What I say on the context one is look for patterns. Read about your industry, read about your products, get data. The best builder of context is data. Get information. Find out the analytics. What are your customers saying? What are your marketing people saying about your competitive set? About how are your products performing? And then compare that data to what people are saying. How are people spinning that data? What's being actually reported in the QBR? Where are there gaps between what's actually happening and what people are trying to spin? That's a great contextual skill that you can figure out where you fit there. With connection is go spend time with people. I have one guy. He's a case study in the book. He asked people 3 questions. He'd say, "What can I do to be a better colleague to you?" He'd say, "What are you working on? What's the most important thing you're working on to you today, or this week or this month?" And then he'd say, "What can I do to help you with that really important thing?" Just 3 basic, simple questions, and people knew he meant it. So go learn about your people. Don't network. Just go make friends. Just go build relationships. Go find out what people are working on. Find out what people are interested in. Ask people for the story. Ask people, whether they're direct, especially their direct reports, but even peers, when they ask, what's the thing this year you're most proud of that you worked on? Tell me the story. How'd you do it? And just get them to tell the story, because they will tell you all kinds of things about themselves and about what they need from you by telling you the story of this thing they're proud of. So just listen to the story. Go get information about people and then learn how to build connections with them, but do it intentionally. Relationships take a lot of work. They're not going to form easily. And especially go build a relationship with the person you think is the most unlike you. The person that in a meeting, they make you bristle. The person who you think you're on the opposite polarity of politically, religiously, operationally, whatever it is, the person you think is the nemesis or the irritant, build that connection first. Because if you can do that, you'll be fine. And you will model for the organization what it means to create connections anywhere.
Yeah, I think that's a solid piece of advice. That's an interesting element, and I think every organization probably has one to some degree. So go there first.
We all have it. We all have a they. Who are you saying they did this, or them again, or that group? Who are you othering? Whoever you're othering. First of all, if you're a leader and you're othering out loud, you're
right.
Really not good. If people are coming to you and othering and you're not stopping it, shame on you. But whoever in your mind, and hopefully not more than that, are othering, that is a clue that's a tumor growing on your career that you need to go fix.
What are you working on these days? I'm super curious. I don't, do you have anything new coming down the pipeline that you're
I do. I have a brand new book coming out. based on a 15-year longitudinal study with more than 3,200 leaders. And it's on organizational honesty.
On what?
Organizational honesty.
Organizational honesty. Okay.
The book is called To Be Honest. Lead with the Power of Truth, Justice, and Purpose. And we're in final approach. We have just launched a video series that will take us through the launch of the book in 21. And I'm so excited about this book. I got to talk with some of the world's greatest luminaries, greatest executives. The book's about exemplars. I'm not looking to tell the Wells Fargo story or the Volkswagen story anymore. We know that. I wanted to know under what conditions people would tell the truth, behave fairly, and act with purpose. What the research revealed is that honesty is defined by all three parts: truth, justice, and purpose. You can't have one without having all three. People have to say the right thing, do the right thing, and say and do the right thing for the right reason. If you don't, you'll be considered clever or nice or good-hearted or good-intended or results-oriented, but you won't be considered honest. I wanted to know what conditions organizations were working under that created the conditions under which people would choose that, or they would choose to lie, cheat, and be self-interested. And it turns out organizations do, in fact, create liars out of honest people. They create selfish people out of honest people, simply because they have conditions they're not aware of that promote those behaviors. So, for example, what we called clarity in your identity, strategic clarity. We all have a mission, a vision, we have purpose statements, we have all these statements that say who we are. Turns out people are reading them, and that if they look at those statements and roll their eyes and conclude that's for cosmetic purposes, we don't really do that here, you have now institutionalized duplicity. What you have said is we say one thing and do another. If you are not regularly talking about those statements, if you're not trying to embed them in your practices, if you're not regularly firing people for disavowing them, you have said to people, it's okay to be a hypocrite. And when that is the case, you are now 3 times more likely to have people lie, cheat, and serve their own interests first. But if there is alignment, if you are who you say you are, meaning the purpose I say I live by is actually what I strive to live by, now you're 3 times more likely to have people tell you the truth, behave fairly toward each other, and act and serve a greater good.
Yeah.
So
alignment being the key element to
visible, tangible actions matching words.
Yep. Yeah. So congruency, alignment are two things that are critical, things that I show in coaching often. It's sort of is that in alignment with what you believe? Is that in alignment with the purpose? So yeah, excellent. When is that coming to market?
It will be in the spring of 21.
Fantastic.
But in the meantime, to whet people's appetites, we have a whole video series we've just launched. I got to interview people like Jonathan Haidt and Amy Edmondson and James Dietert and Sun Yin Shang and Ed Townley from Cabot Creamery, the CEO, and Hubert Joly from Best Buy and Vincent Stanley from Patagonia. So the book is about exemplars. The book is about the people we want to emulate, modeling these honest practices. And so I've got a video series of webinars, sort of we're calling it building your honor. What I say in the book is that honesty is a muscle. It's not a character trait. And so we're going to go to the Honesty Gym together and build our honesty muscles this fall. And then I'm launching a news magazine show called Moments of Truth in the spring that'll showcase all the interviews I did with these exemplars, so you can get an inside scoop on their stories. So lots of appetite waiting before the book comes out to get people ready for it.
Oh, that's fantastic. I love hearing stories of people who you want to use as an example, right? And I love the fact that you've shined on some great ones, but not the ones that are always getting shined on for what it is that they do. So kudos to you for that good work. I'm fascinated by your study. I kind of disclosed that I have not read your book, and it's on order right now. It's coming in immediately. I so appreciate your sharing so generously today on the 4 success factors. What is the best way for people to either follow you and or maybe get on your list for your going to the gym series?
So come to Navalent.com, Navalent.com, and we have great videos there. We've got all kinds of If you're dealing with the virtual workplace now, the hybrid model, we have a brand new ebook called Designing Your Virtual Workplace. You can find it at navalent.com/virtual. If you're leading some kind of major change, you can get our playbook for transformation at navalent.com/transformation. You can sign up for our newsletters and our magazines. Follow me at LinkedIn, and that's where you get all the information you need about our video series. Or follow me on Twitter, and do stay in touch and join the journey.
Fantastic. Well, I'm excited for your book launch, and I will include the links you've just mentioned in the show notes below on this.
Perfect.
On this episode. Ron, thank you so much for your time today. It has been a pleasure chatting with you.
Allison, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.